it's been brought to my attention that certain people think I give a share without wearing a kippah. I am wearing a kippah. I just still have my hair. Everybody at our age doesn't have our hair. I have my hair, and it's not grey because I'm not married yet. When you get married, you go grey for stress. But I am wearing a kippah.
So can I do the same qualification? Same thing. I'm also wearing a kippah.
Okay.
And Kevin sometimes messages me and says, "Gavin, your kippah's fallen off." And then I have to message him back and say, "No, it's on." He says, "I don't have a kippah on." So I think we both have that same problem. We tend to wear it at the back, more towards the back. You're allowed to.
Correct. Absolutely. So just officially, Kevin, for the record, I've had one or two people ask me why I don't wear a kippah during the show. In fact, I do. I've still got it.
Because you always have. Our front's a little elevated, so it's hard to see the yarmulke.
Absolutely. Now, Arthur's doing wonderful work caregiving for the elderly, so he's listening. He can't be on the actual screen, and he can't be there for questioning, which is absolutely suitable for him. And Kevin's going to teach us halacha now. Kevin, go for it.
Okay, continuing with the Mishnah Berurah and Shabbos. Okay, now there's the malacha of dash, which is called threshing. Dash and lisha, kneading, melabain, laundering, and all the other categories of malachas. A person who has not studied these laws can very easily transgress them, since each malacha has many details which involve Torah prohibitions. This is especially applicable to the prohibitions of cooking, leaving food on a blech, and insulating, which are vast subjects that involve many fine detail and are very relevant. The author of Urim V'Tumim, Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz, warns us in his Sefer Yaradavash that it's impossible to avoid Shabbos desecration or studying all its laws until they are clearly understood. One reason that many people are ignorant of the laws of Shabbos is the difficulty of the subject matter, which cannot be mastered by simply learning Shulchan Aruch, unless one understands the source of his rulings in the Gemara and Poskim. Nowadays, most people cannot find the time for such in-depth study due to many distractions and difficulties of our times. Furthermore, on every detail of al-halacha, there are extensive debates among the Poskim, as mentioned in the introduction. Therefore, with Hashem's help, we will explain these difficulties. Okay. That's more of a... So, yeah. Okay, I think I'll start proper from tomorrow. Okay,
thank you, Kev. Just one thing before we get started, just incidentally, is that sometimes, I was having a chat with a friend of mine that he was in a bit of a depression because he said to me that his life keeps having the same problem again and again. And if you speak to different people, they seem to have the same, including myself, whether it's finance, relationships, or health, is that they've got a lifelong plaguing problem. So I remember Rabbi Ron Cohen was saying there are different types of problems. Somebody can have a lifelong plaguing problem, and other people, it's like being pelted with stones. They've got a lot of little problems that end up working their effect to wear a person out when they're in fact meant to make a person stronger. But it's very difficult because you figure, what's the use of trying if the problem never ever resolves itself? So I think the thing of it is, I think it's a continual process of working on how to remain mentally healthy, because the reality is unhappy people commit an avera in the sense that their own lives are of such poor quality that suicide seems like a better option, because they cannot seem to see a solution to what they deem as a permanent problem. And further to which, they make the others in their lives miserable because they can't find any inherent joy, and it's infectious. So, when there's a commandment to be happy, it sounds a bit callous, but it's not for Hashem. It's the fact of it is that life is such a precious gift that we have to look at techniques. I remember Dennis Prager came up with a happiness hour on a radio show, different techniques of how to be happy. And I think one of the things that I encountered is there was a black woman that said to a friend of mine, he was complaining that SARS was taking all his money and he was not getting anything for his tax, and she called it white man's problems. And he was a bit offended, and then he laughed about it because he thought his problems are somebody else's dreams. To be able to have enough money to have to work out how to get rid of SARS to pay the taxes. A person's other problems, like a difficulty in relationships, is somebody else's dream because they wish they could have a relationship. Somebody else's whatever you're going through. If you think about it, compared to hundreds of years ago, live like kings. They would be very hard pressed to find an era where you could imagine going to the shops in the cases when we were hunters and gatherers, etc., and all the fruit and vegetables are there fully ripe. You don't have to hunt anything. You don't have to kill anything. I mean, people refer to a vegetarian as that useless person in the tribe that could hunt, but that's a separate job. But the reality is to have everything laid out on the shelves just for your easy disposal. In the old days, your lifespan was about 20, 22 years old. People used to get married when they were sexually immediately mature at about 12 to 13 and have children because their lifespan was diminished. Your common tonsillitis would turn into quinsy, and that would be the end of a person. That would result in death. Any moderate infection in war. Infection in war was the major reason of death, not the actual wound. It was be hard-pressed to find a season where people didn't drop dead of flu. So, guys, also there was no anesthetic. So when you needed your tooth pulled out, they gave you a swig of wine and you held on tightly onto a piece of cloth and they yanked it from you. If they had to saw off your leg in a bad war to save you, believe me, they'd give you alcohol and a stick in your mouth. We are living in a dream time, as bad as it is now, and mankind is a warring creature by nature. So when there's nothing to fight about, they invent things to fight about. My needs are not being met. You're not acknowledging my sexuality. You're being prejudiced against. That's mankind's. Sometimes, man in a situation of affluence has too much time on his hands for his own good. So all I was saying, guys, is before we start the Gemara share, just be grateful that we are alive and we have another opportunity to learn Torah. That will get started. I very rarely have anything to say apart from the
Oh, man, that was very well said. And that's pretty much what's playing out in America right now. Exactly everything you said.
Yeah.
And more. The same concept. It's terrible. Right?
So how we ended up on the share yesterday is we were on the 65th daf. Okay. And we were trying to say that we wanted a more precise definition of where the value would change in an animal or a inanimate object for that matter due to price fluctuation. So it's very easy when you're talking about an animal, because an animal could fatten out, it could sexually mature, it could develop weight, and obviously the endocrinology would kick in and an animal would develop. So that's natural appreciation. But then for inanimate objects and also animals, the price of meat could change per kilogram. Beef. Inanimate objects, for example, wine that was either there was an abundance of a Chardonnay would now become scarce, or vice versa. There was only an import from California, now a winery in Cape Town opened up. So price fluctuations is how we deal with this discernible issue with regards to inanimate objects. It does occur with livestock, but mainly with inanimate objects. Livestock in and of themselves, and they're starved, tend to grow and develop. We did discuss what happens. I don't want to go through yesterday's share. So what we're now discussing is a situation in which Rav issued his ruling. So if you want to say originally, as the Gemara said, when the article was stolen, it was worth 1 zuz. And in the end, it was worth 4 zuzim. Okay? So in other words, when he sold or slaughtered the animal. Okay? In that case, Rav ruled that he pays for the principal according to the stolen article's value, or the stolen animal, if it's an animal, or stolen article, if it's inanimate, value when he stole it. So in other words, when he stole it, it was worth 1 zuz. In the end, before he slaughtered or sold it, it was worth 4 zuz. So your principal, your compensation back, if you don't have the animal to give back, then you obviously pay the value when the thief stole it, which was the compensatory amount for the principal, which would be 1 zuz. Okay? So now it's saying, hang on a sec, do we say in this matter that Rav disputes the ruling of Rabbah? Because Rabbah said, and this is in Bava Kamma 43a, that basically there was a situation that one who stole a keg of wine from another, that originally when he stole it was worth a zuz, and in the end, when it was destroyed, is worth 4 zuzim. So the question is, how much does he pay? Does he pay 1 zuz or 4 zuzim? So the answer is if he destroyed it actively, meaning he broke it maliciously, the keg, or maybe drank its contents of wine, he pays the 4 zuzim. In other words, its value at the time of destruction. So it's no longer a case of seen as theft. It's seen as a case of damages, nazikin. And then at the end of the day, you have to replace that because we learned Ma'aveh, when man damages something, he has to pay full payment as far as that's concerned. Okay? So if, however, he left the keg of wine on the cabinet, and then there was a tornado and took down half his house, that's an unavoidable mishap. So he only pays the value of the what it was worth when he stole it. And at that stage, it had an accumulated value and was only worth a zuz. Okay. Now, if it broke by itself, he only pays a zuz, its value at the time of the theft, for the example that I've given you. Okay. So in other words, the Gemara gives us the reason for the distinction that a thief is liable only to pay for the stolen article's value at the time of the theft. And that applies only when the stolen, sorry guys, I've got my tongue twisted, only when the stolen article is no longer in existence, as I explained. When it is in existence, the article still belongs to the original owner, and the thief is only obligated to return it, regardless of its present value. That's according to Rashi. Okay? Now, accordingly, when the stolen keg increases its value into 4 zuzim, it's the owner's keg that's increased in value. It's not the thief, but when the thief breaks it, he's now in effect committing an act of new robbery, in which he's stealing a 4 zuz keg of wine from the owner. But obviously, he's liable to pay the 4 zuzim. But if it broke in and of itself or through an unavoidable accident, he only pays for the original timing of the theft, which was worth 1 zuz. But just know, as I said yesterday, Nesivot HaMishpat refers to it not as an act of robbery, but an act of damage, a mazik. Therefore, is replacing it. Now, if you slaughter or sell a stolen animal, that's considered a direct destruction of the stolen article. Okay? And it's analogous to breaking or drinking the keg. So you can take an inanimate object, like the keg, and apply it to an animal, because when you sell it, the thief can't get it back. When he slaughtered it, he can't get it back. So according to Rabbah, then, the animal was originally worth 1 zuz, and then it increased in value to 4 zuzim at the time of the slaughter or sale. The thief would have to pay the 4 zuzim for the principal as well. Not just 1 zuz as ruled by Rav. That's Rashi's commentary. Okay. So it seems as though there's a contradiction between the two. So the Gemara says, look, in fact, it's not necessarily the case that Rav is disagreeing with Rabbah. In fact, he agrees with Rabbah, but under certain circumstances. So when did Rav state his ruling? That even when he slaughters or sells the stolen animal, he pays the principal according to its value to bless you at the time of the theft. Amen should be the word that somebody blesses you. You need all the blessing you can have, my friend. Well, so, basically, all circumstances where Rav and Rabbah agree. In a case, for example, where originally it was worth 4 zuzim, and in the end it was worth 1 zuz. In such cases, he pays the principal according to the stolen article's value when he stole it, and he pays the 2-fold, 4-fold, and 5-fold payments according to the stolen article's value at the time that he's sued in court. So let's just look at this at first. Originally, the exposition by Rabbah was that it was worth, again, a zuz originally, right? It accumulated in value, the keg, because all of a sudden now the let's just say the Cape Town winery went into liquidation. It's not unheard of in South Africa. So then you could only get it from California, that Chardonnay. So suddenly the price got jacked up to 4 zuz. Now, it's different in the particular case that I'm giving now where they agree, because it originally was worth 4 zuzim, and in the end it was worth 1 zuz, because originally there was only for example, the winery and import from California. And now there was a winery that saw a gap in the market in Cape Town and decided to open up as competition because they saw a gap in the market. And now the price of import was no longer a priority. And Chardonnay went down from 4 zuz to 1 zuz because you could get it locally. So they're dealing with opposite factors. But it's where it starts off high and goes low that they agree, but when it starts off low and goes high, they don't agree. Unless there's destructive damage, okay? So, just to let you know, for example, if you stole an ox worth 4 zuzim and slaughtered it when its value had decreased to 1 zuz, he pays 5 times the ox's value. Again, ox is worth 4 zuzim, and he slaughtered it and its value decreased to 1 zuz, he pays 5 times the ox's value. Why? The first time for the principal is compensation for the actual animal. That's the principal portion, and that's valued at 4 zuzim. And now that it's dropped, there's 4 penalty payments, but it's dropped to 1 zuz. So there's 1 zuz for each penalty payment. Kevin, are you all right?
I was just running with us.
But you didn't sneeze earlier either, didn't you? Just
I blew my nose. I blew my
Yeah,
nose.
that's what I thought. That's why I couldn't understand why Damon said yes. That's why I never got involved in the process, because it seemed out of place. But I don't think you heard correctly. Sorry, Damon.
What do you mean?
No, I didn't sneeze. I blew my nose.
He blew his nose. It just sounded like a bit of a sneeze, I think.
Okay. Are you done? Sorry to be insensitive.
That's the safest bet. Are you done with everything, Kevin?
No, I have to go for therapy tomorrow, Damon. Thanks very much. I have to go see a therapist because of you. You offended my sensitivities. Gavin, you as well. I'm very disappointed with you too.
You've been with us for about 2 years now doing that. We've been friendly for over like 20, 25 years.
Yeah, we just prefer it when you blow the shofar rather than your nose.
I'll put it on silent.
You would have been in permanent therapy by now if you couldn't handle us.
Okay, so Gav, come, let's get back to the shirt. It's knocking my train of thought. All right, no problem. All right, so listen, let me just tell you where we're holding. So there's an ox, it's worth 4 zuz, takes a dive in price, okay? Now it's worth a zuz. So what happens is on the principal amount, that's valued at the time of the original theft. So you pay 4 zuzim as compensation on the principal portion. Done. Now, when you're working out the 4 additional payments, that's done at the court assessment date, at what it was worth when it was slaughtered. Even if the court assessment is in August, it works out when it was slaughtered, which could be in June, but not when he stole it in January. You get what I'm saying? But when he slaughtered it in June, Oak was a moron, the thief, because it dropped to 1 zuz. So now, at the only time it actually worked out for him was in the kefer payment, because for your ox you pay a 4-fold for the penalty and 1-fold for the principal. So it's 5 times. So the 4-fold when it drops to 1 zuz is 4 zuz. The original principal at the time of theft was 4 zuz. So now he pays 4 zuz for the principal restitution and additional 4 zuz on his fine for slaughtering the stolen ox. Okay. So the Gemara basically cites support for Rav's ruling from a brisa. Rav Chanina taught in a brisa in support of Rav, if the householder, what do we mean by the householder? The unpaid custodian. In other words, you see this in Shemot chapter 22, verse 7. It uses the term where the householder refers to an unpaid custodian who was entrusted with the care of a deposit. Okay, so that's where it refers to. Whenever you read the word, if the householder, it means it means the unpaid custodian as well. So the unpaid custodian claimed a deposit he was safekeeping was stolen, and he gave an oath to that effect. He swore. Okay. Now, and why did he swear? Because if you make an oath, that it was stolen from you as an unpaid custodian, you free yourself from liability for the missing deposit. Okay? Now, but then he felt bad, and he admitted that he took the item for himself, and he had sworn falsely. And then witnesses also came and testified that he took the item for himself. Okay, so then we want to know, well, what is the law? So the law is as follows, is that basically, if the order was he admitted his guilt before the witnesses came and testified against him, in other words, it was his conscience bothering him, not after the fact that he came clean, he pays the principal. And he pays a 1/5 surcharge. Now, the 1/5 surcharge, by the way, is paid to the original person that trusted him. That's not to Hashem. The Asham offering is to Hashem. Okay. Now, basically, there was in Leviticus, Kevin, what's the Hebrew word for Leviticus? What is it?
Vayikra.
That's right. Chapter 5, verse 20 to 26 states that you pay the Asham offering for if you come clean. Does that make sense? But you don't pay the twofold payment if it's an inanimate object, or the fourfold or fivefold. Okay, but that's only if you admit to that you swore falsely, but before witnesses come. But if the witnesses come and afterwards he said, no, I did wrong and everything else, he pays the twofold payment and he brings an Asham offering. Because the Asham offering is to Hashem. It's possible that afterwards he felt ashamed, so that goes to Hashem, but he doesn't give the 1/5 surcharge in addition to the twofold payment, because it's accounted for with his twofold payment. And this is according to Rabbi Yaakov. So I'll explain to you what we actually mean here. Okay? So, because since the witness testified before his confession, the custodian, the unpaid custodian, is now liable under the rules of two areas of law. Okay? The witness's testimony that he lied makes him liable to the twofold payment, right? And his own subsequent, in other words, he didn't feel as bad, but he obviously did admit. I mean, there's two things. If witnesses come, you could deny till the cows come home, but there are witnesses against you, and you still have to pay. But he broke down afterwards and he said, no, I did wrong. But he did take a push that there were witnesses against him. So there's two areas of law, okay? He has to pay the twofold payment for having lied under oath. And for the subsequent confession, I mean, he had nothing new to what we already knew from the witnesses, but he did feel bad. But that makes him liable to Hashem for the Asham and the 1/5 surcharge for denying falsely under monetary obligation. But that 1/5 surcharge is covered within the careful payment, okay? So in other words, cumulatively you must pay the principal, the 1/5 surcharge on the principal, and must bring an Asham. So the surcharge of 1/5 is worked on the principal amount. Now the careful payment and the 1/5 surcharge are paid to the same person. Again, Asham offering sacrifice to Hashem on the Most High. The careful payment, which is your knas, your penalty payments, which would be twofold for an inanimate object, fourfold for a sheep, and fivefold for an ox. In that particular case, the penalty payment is only 3 times other than the principal for a sheep, and 4 times other than the principal for an ox. It's saying that the owner is not necessarily having to make 2 separate payments. Rather that the penalty payment, the careful payment, can also serve as a 1/5 surcharge. But, and this is the big but, it's possible only when the careful payment and the 1/5 surcharge are identical amounts. In other words, the careful payment amounts to 1 zuz, and the 1/5 surcharge amounts to 1 zuz. In that case, the custodian's additional one zuz can be considered both together as a kefil payment and a 1/5 payment. But when the amounts are not identical, in other words, maybe the kefil payment amounts to a zuz and the 1/5 surcharge amounts to a quarter of a zuz, the 1 zuz payment cannot be considered as a payment for the 1/5 surcharge, even though it's greater than the 1/5 surcharge. In other words, even though the kefil is greater, it doesn't replace the surcharge if they're different amounts. Because if you pay the 1/5 surcharge, it's an act of atonement, of apology to the actual owner of the person whom you stole the article from. There's an apology to Hashem and also an apology to the person. So that's not restitution, and it's not a penalty on bad behavior for having lied under oath. Remember, the one is a confessionary based, and the other one is a penalty based. Okay. So, in other words, when you pay the 1/5 surcharge, it's an act of an atonement. It's not restitution, and it's effected only if it's paid in the amount of 1/5. Anything more than 1/5 is not the payment of the 1/5, as Rashi said. Because it has to be, as Rashi said, a distinguishable entity that you've paid the confessionary amount, that you're sorry to the person. Tosfot also said, and it wouldn't help if the custodian were to pay the deposit to the 1/5 payment first. And then he says, okay, that's a small amount, let me pay you that. And then I'm going to pay you the balance of the kefil payment, which is 3 times the principal for a sheep and 4 times the principal for an ox. Because you can't atone in full, by the way, unless you've made restitution. Somebody says to you, they owe you money. I'm really sorry I haven't paid you. Guess what? They're not forgiven unless they pay you. They can say sorry 1,000,000 times. It doesn't pay the bills. A sorry payment, a confessionary payment, is after the fact. Do the right thing, and then your apology is accepted. So even in that case, it doesn't appear that the first payment was made as 1/5 payment, but rather it has to be seen as a first installment of the kefil payment if the amounts differ. If the amounts are the same, you can basically achieve both, both goals in one go, the kefil payment as well as the surcharge. Okay. So the sages say, with regards to the 1/5 surcharge, and he shall return that which he sinned in its principal amount and its fifth. So where do we see this from? Bamidbar, Numbers. Bamidbar is Numbers, hey Kev? Chapter 5, verse 7, and I'll just read the clause. And he shall return that which he sinned in its principal amount, and its fifth he shall add to it. So the word ashamu, which means his guilt. Okay, my Hebrew is not as good as yours. It means that refers to his restitution of the principal. That's the object in which he sinned, rather than the asham offering. Because the asham offering is mentioned in a completely different verse. That's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 25. And it says, he shall bring his asham offering to Hashem. Does that make sense? So they're two different verses. Again, the 1/5 surcharge is paid to the person, a confessionary payment to the person you lie to. And the asham offering is a confession to Hashem that you're sorry. So what it implies is if you say that he shall return the 1/5 in its principal amount, or the principal amount in its fifth, what does this imply? That money that is paid in its principal amount, to that he adds a fifth. But to money that is not paid in its principal amount alone, but rather in multiples of the principals, he does not add a fifth. So what we're actually saying is, in our case, because remember that was the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov, but the sages say something different, that where the custodian swore falsely, he's liable to the twofold payment, okay, because the witnesses came afterwards and he came clean, okay, and he's not liable to the 1/5 surcharge. And that's a complete contrast to the view of Rav Yaakov, who said the custodian is liable both to the twofold payment and the 1/5 surcharge, and is exempt from paying the 1/5 surcharge only when it's identical amount to the kofar payment, as per Rashi's explanation. So the sages agree with Rav Yaakov on one issue, that the custodian is still liable to the Hashem offering, even though he must pay the kefil payment. So again, Rav Yaakov says that if it happens to be that you've lied and then afterwards you've confessed, you still have to pay the confessionary amount of 1/5 added to the principal, as well as the twofold payment, which was the principal in its identical amount as a club penalty. Obviously, for a sheep, another 3 amounts to the principal, and an ox 4 amounts to the principal. But the sages say the minute that you've got the principal and the penalty, you no longer have to pay 1/5, because it's talking about the principal only. The minute you've already gone to the point where you lied, you don't get that atonement to the original owner, but you still have to atone to Hashem. And they both agree, Rav Yaakov and the sages, that you bring an Hashem offering. All right, guys, I think we'll end off on that note. I hope the shiur was clean.
Okay, Damon.
Yeah.
You said, because previously the penalty for stolen ox or sheep that was slaughtered or sold by the ox is 5-fold and the sheep is 4-fold. So you're saying that 3 plus the 1 makes the 4 for the sheep. Is that what you say?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, is that how it makes it up?
Yeah. So in other words, I stole sheep from you worth 100 zuz. I either give you the sheep back and then pay 300 zuz to you in terms of a penalty. It's the sheep's value times 3. Or if I don't have the sheep back, I pay what that sheep was worth at the time I stole it, and the penalty at whatever time it's worth when I slaughtered or sold it, when the court date appears. So even if a court date's a few months after I sold or slaughtered it, that's the point date at which I pay the kefir payment, which is 3 times the amount for a sheep, and for an ox 4 times the amount. So if you add the principal plus 3, that's 4 for a sheep. If you add the principal plus 4, that's